Hi, Missourians. I am Shira Berkowitz, Promo's Communication Manager, and I want to thank you for your patience and then welcome you all to Promo's virtual LGBTQ Equality Rally. Promo is Missouri's equality organization and sees our state as a place where every LGBTQ Missourian deserves to be themselves and live equally with dignity, with respect, just as we are. As the coronavirus pandemic continues to spread, Missourians across the state have been left more vulnerable to the deep consequences of the virus. And yet, among those most vulnerable are our LGBTQ family, whose vulnerability is made worse in a state without non-discrimination protections. Promo is playing a critical role in making sure our communities and leaders understand the importance of protecting all LGBTQ Missourians during this time and in the future. We're specifically making sure that we do not lose sight of the fight we came from earlier this year. Missouri saw more anti-LGBTQ bills than any other state in the country that sought to roll back marriage equality, attack transgender youth, and erase the visibility of our LGBTQ community. These 19 anti-LGBTQ bills made it impossible for pro-equality bills like the Missouri Nondiscrimination Act to move forward. So we're excited to rally you here today to bring you firsthand stories from national and local leaders who are creating change, taking action together, and creating a state with more equality. I'm pumped to introduce you to Lori Lindsey. Lori is a former professional soccer player who has represented her sport on both a national and international level. Her professional playing career spanned 13 years, with her most notable accomplishment representing the United States women's national team at the 2011 Women's World Cup in Germany, and helping the team earn the 2012 Olympic gold medal in London. Lori is one of only 4 players to have played in all 3 U.S. professional women's soccer leagues. She's best known for her infectious humor, hard work, and perseverance, a necessity given the demands and unpredictability of her professional soccer career. She's currently a soccer analyst for the National Women's Soccer League, Major League Soccer, and ESPN. She also travels the globe speaking, raising awareness, and advocating for women's equality and the LGBTQ community. So now, here's Lori.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I am so honored and thrilled to be here with you all today. So thank you and good morning. Okay. I like to say that I've done a lot of wild things in my life, like shovel snow in my backyard so I can run sprints in the middle of winter so I can be prepared throughout the year to play soccer whenever I wanted, to shaving lines in my eyebrows so I look like Vanilla Ice in 7th grade, to climbing Mount Kilimanjaro with only 5 weeks notice to play in the highest elevation soccer match ever played, all for gender equality. But before I get ahead of myself, more on Kilimanjaro in a second, let me give you a little bit of background about my journey. For as long as I can remember, it was always my goal to play on the U.S. women's national team. Every single day for nearly 30 years, my focus was soccer. My focus was singular, my focus was soccer. And I started playing soccer because my brother Chris played, and it was easier for my parents to truck both of us around rather than separately. And my dad wasn't the type of dad who was going to sit us down and help us with our math homework. No, he was the dad that was building soccer goals in the backyard so that at any given moment we could practice extra. And he was also the dad that was teaching us life lessons through the game of soccer. And from an early age, my dad was convinced that I was a special player, and he was determined to push me as far as I could go. But after years of him telling me to practice more, traveling every weekend, playing on all boys teams, I had had enough. I had hit a wall. And seriously, Chris and I were polishing and minkling our soccer shoes every single night before each game since the age of 8. So what kid wouldn't be burnout? By the time 7th grade hit, I was ready to quit soccer and head to Hollywood. My mom was big into the arts, and so since I grew up on movies, grew up in the theater, I thought I was destined to be a famous movie star. Well, that was until I enrolled in my first acting class, and let's just say my portrayal of Meep in The Diary of Anne Frank didn't go as well as planned, and in fact, it went horribly. And I definitely wouldn't be speaking with you all today if I had followed that path. But in all seriousness, that was a big turning point for me, because up until that point in time, I had been training and playing because my dad told me to. And this started my journey of playing because I wanted to. And I realized how much I love the game and how much joy I got from it. Around this time too, I also started strength training or weightlifting, and that built my confidence both on and off the field, and ended up being a big component of the longevity of my career and my early success. I went on to play on all US youth national teams. I earned a full athletic scholarship to the University of Virginia, where I played for 4 years. And I went on to become one of only 4 players to play in all 3 of our women's professional leagues here in the United States. And when I think back about my career, the word that comes to mind is perseverance. Because I think a lot of times when we think about athletes or athletics, we think of this kind of linear path. You start out and then you just skyrocket to success. And I can't tell you how many no's compared to yeses I had from coaches. There was a 6-year gap between our first pro league and our second pro league. And I really had to decide, is this the goal that I want to continue to pursue, or do I need to find another path? But for me, it was that singular focus. It was that belief in myself that kept me going. And fortunately, I became a mainstay on the US Women's National Team. I went on to play in the 2011 World Cup and the 2012 London Olympic Games. And a question that I get asked quite often is, what was it like playing in the World Cup? What's it like playing in the Olympics? And in short, it's amazing. It's everything that you could dream about in terms of playing with some of your best friends, them understanding the journey that you've been on, and playing at the pinnacle of your sport. But at the same time, what I wasn't prepared for is that feeling of something was missing. Because for me, it was 3 decades of soccer, soccer, soccer. And I realized that soccer had become the end and not the means. And I wanted it the other way around. Fortunately, I had leaders like Mia Hamm and Julie Foudy who really spoke out and were leaders on the US Women's National Team, and spoke out with courage and fight for women's equality. But I thought those platforms that they were using reserved for the big name players. In my generation, that would be Megan Rapinoe, Abby Wambach. And it wasn't until I understood that we all have a platform, we all have a story that needs to be shared, and we have that responsibility to use it. And once I had that understanding, that began my shift from that singular focus on the field to a broader one off the field. And one thing that happens when you reach the end of your professional career is that you realize moving forward, you have to be something other than what you have been. And I knew I wanted to be an example beyond drive, dedication, and determination on the field. In 2012, right after the Olympics, I came out publicly. And it was then that I knew that I wanted to use my voice for equality and inclusion. I played another 4 years professionally, and it was then that I got involved with Athlete Ally. It was the first organization that provided me with the opportunity to use my platform. And I am so honored to be an ambassador for them and join forces with an ever-growing community of professional Olympic athletes, both current and former, in opposition to racism, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia. More and more, we are witnessing athletes who are eager to bring their full selves to work, because what's at stake is more than the sport we play. And this collaboration is hugely important to me because I think we can all agree equality is a team sport. Since retiring, my world has gotten a lot bigger. Playing allowed me to travel the world and experience many different countries and cultures. But it has been in the past 4 years that I've developed a much deeper appreciation for the enormity of the task before us when it comes to social change. And I developed this appreciation through a lot of the work that I've done, in particular with the US State Department and their Sports Envoy program. And the program is the idea that sport is a vehicle for building relationships and understanding. A few years back, I had the ability to visit a Syrian refugee camp on the border of Egypt and Jordan. And I taught young girls and women soccer who had grown up in a culture that did not support women in sport. We played on this makeshift turf field with a tarp draped around it because they are not allowed to run freely in front of their male counterparts. For some of these young girls and women, it was the first time they experienced soccer or even just running around on a field, and their excitement was so evident. It became clear that empowerment is not a one-way street. It is a powerful reciprocal force. And their joy, their energy, the resiliency that I witnessed that day still fuels my work today. My passion to impact equality and inclusion also led me to Mount Kilimanjaro with the Equal Playing Field Initiative. The idea behind this initiative was that we still have the metaphor that we still have a mountain to climb when it comes to gender equality. We had 6 different continents, 25 different countries represented. It was the largest group to ever climb Mount Kilimanjaro together. And it was the worst soccer match you've ever seen. It was like beach soccer, a high elevation. To give you a little bit of context, we fly at 30,000 feet. We play this match at 18,500, just 800 meters shy of the summit. And it, like I said, was terrible soccer, but it was the deep passion and shared value to bring all of these people together to enhance and make our sport that we love a more enjoyable and safer place for all. Most recently, my advocacy has been centered around trans athletes. Last year, I joined forces again with Athlete Ally and other athletes in opposition to USA's powerlifting ban on trans athletes. These efforts were massively important because unfortunately that bill is still in place, and 2, because the trans community continues to be the most marginalized when it comes to sport and society. As of April 8th, 18 states have introduced bills targeting trans youth in sports. 9 of those states still have active bills. These anti-trans bills do not protect girls and women's access to sport. Instead, they create greater inequality and fail to address the actual barriers to access, like a lack of resources, the lack of training investment in women's coaches, and the high rates of sexual assault. There's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding about trans women who are athletes. It's important to understand that trans girls and women play sport for the same reason that myself and other cisgender girls and women do. Because of their love for the game, the mental and physical benefits they get from sport, and the friends, community, and camaraderie they develop it from. In a time when our administration or leaders should be focusing on the health and well-being of all, we are still seeing lawsuits and bills across this country target trans youth. That is why Promo Missouri and these rallies are so vitally important, because the fight is ongoing. As you could possibly tell, the common thread in my activism is access, equality, and inclusion. And as you continue to think about your path forward, as we all continue to think about our paths forward, I'll leave you with this. 3 lessons that were true while I was playing and that are still relevant today. 1, own your strength. What are your unique qualities, and bring those to the table. Explore what your skills are and own it. It's about self-confidence and self-knowledge. 2, use your voice. Owning your strength is about you. Using your voice is about being a leader in your community, on your team, in your town, in your classroom. It's about making this world a better place. And 3, keep showing up. Allyship is not one and done. It is ongoing. And if what we desire most is a more equitable and inclusive world, it is up to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lori. Thank you for joining us this morning, talk to Missourians and sharing your story about, using your platform and using, what you know and who you are to be able to uplift the most marginalized in our community. So thank you so much, Lori. And thank you to Athlete Ally for connecting us and making this possible so we can have this really important conversation. So I am actually going to pass this over to Representative Crystal Quade. I know Lori talked a little bit about, the scary things that are happening in other states, including in Missouri, when it comes to targeting trans youth. So Representative Crystal Quade has been with us throughout session as a champion, and we'll be able to have a conversation real quick about what that has looked like.
Great, thank you, Charis. And Lori, thank you so much for your story. I couldn't help but write down some of the things that you said because it's so pertinent to what we're doing here in Jefferson City and the work that needs to be done. As mentioned at the start of this call, it's been a rough year in the Missouri legislature, particularly for the LGBT community. As said, we've had more bills than any other state. I believe, counting amendments, we were up to 21 different bills attacking the LGBT community, with a huge emphasis on going after trans kids. And, I've been here, this is my 4th session now, and each year there is some big emotional thing that we deal with. There really are no words to explain what this year has been like, dealing with these bills that all of them were getting committee hearings, and just the horrendous things that were being said and the stories that or the lack of knowledge that folks had. It was very emotional. But what was also emotional in a positive was the amazing amount of people that continue to come to Jefferson City. Lori talked about using your skills, your voice, and showing up. And those 3 things could not be more pertinent to what we saw in Jefferson City, and honestly why I believe today, with 3 weeks left, we are not seeing movement on these bills as of yet. We still have some work to do, but every single session we had parents and kids, educators, professionals come and share their stories about why these bills were so damaging, and they kept showing up. There were kiddos, hopefully some that are on this call, who truly were here every single time, and to the point where we knew them. We knew their stories. We became friends with these families because they continued to show up in Jefferson City. But what was so great about folks being here is sharing their stories and changing perspectives. I can talk all day long about things that people in my district or my friends tell me about their personal experiences, but that means nothing compared to a 9-year-old kid coming here and talking about how the bills, that they just want to play football, they just want to play soccer, and how damaging this legislation was for them and just their personal self and their value. And so truly, when we as legislators say often, you should show up, you should be here, lobby us, I know that when you come, sometimes it can feel overwhelming. Sometimes it can feel like a waste of time. I've been there. I started as a citizen activist. But I mean it when I say that it's never a waste of time, that even if you have conversations and you feel like you're not moving the needle, I promise you that you are. And I know the other representatives and senators will speak to that after each lobby day or after each bill that we have folks testifying on, people will come to us later behind the scenes and ask additional questions. They are oftentimes afraid to ask questions publicly or to state their opinions publicly. So they come to us, allies, behind the scenes and ask questions. And I can tell you that throughout the process of this legislative session, where we continue to see bill after bill, behind the scenes, there was so much work happening because of the stories that were shared by individuals. Bills were stopped, bills were changed. We got Republican leaders who were sponsors of these bills move language, sometimes even say they weren't going to continue to push that bill. And that wouldn't have happened if it was just me sitting here saying, hey, this bill's bad. That only happened because we had people who were personally affected by these bills coming time and time and time again, sharing their stories and moving the needle. I know in Missouri, things are, frustrating isn't even the appropriate word. We're going on 21 years of not having protections for the LGBT community. It's asinine. There are so many words that we could sit here and say. And I know that year after year, for folks to continue to come and fight this fight is daunting and it wears on you. And I understand that. But I think that this year is a good testament to the work that Promo and all these other organizations and allies have done, because this was worse than we could have ever imagined. But here we are 3 weeks out, And I feel pretty confident that these bills are not going to make it across the finish line. And that only happened because people continued to show up and be here. I could go on for a very long time, but the few things that I want to say before I toss it over to my other colleagues: when you come here and testify on bills, I know it can feel scary and sometimes overwhelming. A couple things that I always tell people who want to lobby. One, just because we wear blazers and have a fancy pin and have chairs with logos on them, we're regular people. I promise you that you are way more of an expert on these issues than anyone in this building, and that your perspective on legislation is so valuable. And when you get there and you're having these discussions with legislators, I know that oftentimes people are scared to start, but I promise you, once you get going, you will realize that you know more about this legislation than the folks who are trying to get it done. And that in itself hopefully will make you feel a little bit better once you get going. You're like, how are these people even making laws? And I hate to say that, but that's often the reality. The second piece of this is that, as I said before, you may often feel like what you're saying to representatives and senators is going in and out, that folks are not listening. But I promise you that they are. You may only get 10 seconds with them to say, hey, this is how I feel about something, because this building is very busy. Things are moving very quickly. But as I said before, that 10 seconds of your personal story will stick with them. And they will follow up to that when they're in these hearing rooms or they're debating these bills. They will think back to what you said to them and remember your story. And then they will also have conversations with us offline. Citizen lobbying is often a lot of bad emotions, a lot of bad feelings, but it is the only way that we stop bad legislation and that we get good legislation through. Any given year, there are over 2,000 bills filed. There are so many things that cross our desk. For those of you who were on early before this started, you saw us kind of talking behind the scenes about some of the things we're seeing right now. This place is crazy and it moves so very quickly. But when people share their stories, we pause for a moment. And those stories are truly the moments that make a difference. Because if you're not here sharing your story, we're hearing it from the lobbyists and we're hearing it from the bill sponsors and nobody else. And so we need you to continue to show up. I cannot say enough for the people who came this year to stop this nonsense, because it wouldn't have happened without you. And just please continue to show up and help us fight this fight. So thank you guys.
Thank you, Representative Crystal Quade. And I know that we're going to talk a little bit later in this rally about how to show up, especially while you stay at home, because we want you to also stay at home right now. But thank you. Thank you, Representative. I know you've been through almost every single step of the way, especially this session, and seeing those really hard bills. So thank you. And talking about that true impact that we don't see once we leave the building. So I'm actually going to pass it over to Representative Greg Razer, who is one of our champions, who does actually know a lot about the bill that he's sponsoring. And he's going to talk a little bit more about the Missouri Nondiscrimination Act and how deeply important that is. Go ahead, Representative Greg Razer.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everyone who is joining us today. It's great to virtually see you, and welcome to my luxurious Jefferson City apartment. My name is Greg Razer. I am one of the sponsors of the Missouri Nondiscrimination Act. A little brief background on me: I grew up in a tiny town in the Missouri Boot Heel on a cotton farm, went to school at the University of Missouri, and have called Kansas City home for the last 18 years. Representative McCreery and I kind of have a unique perspective on this because we are both former employees of Promo. So I've been working on MONA in one way or another, I think since 2004. And so I want to give a little perspective on where we're at. And just in case there are people watching that aren't familiar, the Missouri Nondiscrimination Act would add sexual orientation and gender identity to our state's human rights statute. And that is the part of law that protects individuals in housing, employment, and public accommodations. So the fact that we're not included means that it is entirely legal in the state of Missouri to fire someone from their job, to kick me out of this apartment, or to deny me a meal at a restaurant simply because I'm gay. this seems like a no-nonsense thing to get passed, yet we've been working, I forget, is this year 21 or 22 that we've been working on this? 22 that we've been working to pass Mona. So when I was working for Promo in 2004, 5, and 6, back then it was kind of right at the beginning of the internet age, and to co-sponsor legislation, you literally took the bill around to people and had them sign their name. And so part of my job was to take the actual physical bill and scurry around and find representatives to co-sponsor. And as I was going around the building, the early 2000s, I would see, friendly Democrats who would run to me to sign it. I would see some rural Democrats who would tell me, Greg, if it ever gets to the floor, I'll vote for it, but I can't put my name on it. And when I would approach Republicans, I would see them scurrying like cockroaches. Fast forward to 2020, and we have Republicans sponsoring this bill, Republicans, plural, sponsoring this bill. We have folks that you would never expect on the other side of the aisle to be our allies. And, we all have perceptions of who our allies will be and who won't be our allies. And let me tell you, oftentimes on the other side of the aisle, it is older, white, straight males from rural Missouri who their son or daughter has come out, or their neighbor, or their friend, or their grandkid. I've had a representative tell me, he said, look, I'm 60 whatever years old, and I had thought one thing about LGBT people my whole life, and now I know I was wrong, and it's time we get this done. So that is, I know sometimes when we talk about Mona and we talk about that it's been 22 years that we've been fighting for this, it feels like we're not making progress because it hasn't passed. But I can tell you we're making progress on this. Every single year, behind the scenes, you see the cracks starting to form. And one of these years, that dam is going to break. And we're going to get this passed. I will tell you, I do think, let me back up. We cannot do this. We cannot get this passed without our allies. Representative Quade, Representative McCreery, Senator Williams that you're about to hear from. It's not going to pass without them. First of all, we're outnumbered. We need their votes. But two, we need their voices. And our allies are so incredibly important. But it's also incredibly important to have openly LGBT people in the chamber. I am one of only 4 in the House. I am running for my state Senate seat, and should I win that, I will likely be the only openly LGBT person in the state Senate, and only the second in our state's history. And I think having that voice in both chambers will be vitally important to getting this bill across the finish line. And I hope I get my 4 to 8 years in the Senate and we see this done and we can move on to the next issue. I also want to talk a little bit about what the previous 2 speakers have said about all the anti-trans bills that were introduced this year in the state of Missouri. And they attacked trans athletes, they attacked trans youth, they attacked the parents of trans kids, they attacked the medical professionals who care for transgender Missourians. And I think what we saw this year was a realization from the far right that they have lost the culture war when it comes to lesbian, gay, and bisexual issues. So now let's start picking on trans people. And of those 20 some odd bills that came out, I mean, a huge proportion were attacking transgender Missourians. And I think they were quite confident that these were going to be easy to pass. But then you showed up. You showed up at the Capitol building and you put a face and a story to the issues. And I'm telling you, sitting in those committee rooms, watching the faces of my colleagues as you spoke, you were changing their minds in that moment. It was so powerful to see. It was so powerful to watch, and you could feel it in the building. And I'll give you two examples, and I'm not going to mention names for obvious reasons, but two examples Representative Quade talked about that we have behind the scenes conversations. And I'll give you a quick kind of idea of what that looks like. I had one representative pull me aside on the House floor, and he said to me, he said, Greg, 10 years ago, I was not with you on lesbian, gay, and bisexual issues, but now I am. However, I'm not there with you on trans issues, but I have a feeling I will be 10 years from now. Will you help me start to understand so I can make that journey? And we sat for about 45 minutes. And, you know, at first he was kind of stumbling over words. He didn't want to say the wrong thing. And I said, look, this is just me and you. I'm never going to say who it was I was having this conversation with. I said, you know, don't worry about language. We'll deal with that later. And he really opened up. And by the end of the conversation, he still wasn't with us, but he was a lot farther along. He did say, you know, did I say everything correctly? And I was like, oh God, no, don't ever say any of that out loud. But it was important that he had that space to ask the questions that he needed to ask. Later, I had another representative. I was in my office. He called and said, would you come to my office? I would like to talk to you. I went to his office. This is, you know, an older white male rural Republican. And we sat there for 2 hours. He told me that he had never been friends with even a gay man. He said, I've never felt comfortable asking any questions. And frankly, he knew nothing. But he felt comfortable talking to me and knowing that I wouldn't share his misconceptions. I wouldn't try to make him look bad about this. Those kind of conversations are going on, and we're here to have those conversations, but they start because you show up. You show up in the building and you turn that light bulb on for them. You make such a difference, and don't ever forget it. And finally, I want to end with this. We had so many amazing trans advocates come to the building this year. And so many of them would come to me and say, Greg, thank you for being an ally. And I want to say to everyone in the transgender community who's watching right now, I'm not an ally. We are the LGBT community. I'm family. We're family, and we're in this together. So you're welcome for being family, I guess. But we've got to think that way. We've got to stick together. The history of our movement tells us that we're going to win. We're going to win. I mean, we started in the 1950s with the Mattachine Society and the Daughters of Bilitis. We went through Stonewall. We elected Harvey Milk. We banded together to fight HIV/AIDS. We have overcome Don't Ask, Don't Tell. We've gotten marriage equality. We're going to win this. We just have to stick together, keep working, and keep showing up. So thank you all for being here with us today. It's great to get a chance to speak with you all. And I appreciate your support, your help, and I appreciate Promo for everything that they do.
Thank you so much, Representative Greg Razer. You can tell why he's a champion, one of our champions for Mona. And I am now going to pass on to another one of our champions within the House, Representative Tracy McCreery, who specifically champions the Youth Mental Health Preservation Act.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me. It's been, I feel giddy that I'm on a panel with all these amazing folks. So, and I want to just personally thank Lori for kind of boosting me up a little bit. Being a member of the minority party can sometimes leave me a little bit deflated. So I actually took notes, and I'm really, I'm feeling ready to go get them again. So interestingly, last night I did a panel with support of the House Democratic Caucus on what we can do to support kids that are being abused and neglected during quarantine, and also people that are victims of relationship violence and domestic violence. And I see some parallels with some of our concerns that we share as a community, including how awful it must be to be forced to stay in a home or a house with people that don't love you and accept you for who you are, whether you're experiencing physical abuse, emotional abuse, rejection for who you are. So, I just want to let you know that there are so many of us here in the Missouri legislature that are trying to do everything in our power to make sure that we're speaking up for those that don't necessarily have a voice in state government. So I am, I feel a little bit of a walk down memory lane coming. Greg mentioned that I had a chance to work for Promo. Before I worked for Promo in 2013 and 2014, I was on the Promo PAC, which was our political arm. I was on that PAC with Denise Lieberman. I think she's still on that PAC. She's probably in year 40 of being on the Promo PAC. So even though she's only 28, she's been on the Promo PAC for 40 years. But I remember when we first started reaching out to candidates in 1998, we couldn't even really get candidates to fill out the survey. I mean, it was like we'd have maybe 7 or 10 people. And then there were oftentimes candidates that were with us, but they didn't want us to publicly endorse them because they didn't want people to know they supported LGBT rights. So I share that because I feel like, although I feel like we're in year 22 of trying to get MONA passed, we have made great strides in the political environment with getting people to be proud of having the support and the endorsement of Promo and the Promo PAC. So we are getting there. It's we just have to keep moving forward. So I am the proud sponsor of a bill that we're calling it the Youth Mental Health Preservation Act. It's of the youth suicide and how people don't talk about suicide. And there is some very hard data that shows that young people and adults as well that are forced to go through some kind of therapy to change them, to fix them, to cure them, causes a tremendous increase in suicides and suicide attempts. So, I'm somebody that I'm sure a lot of people think I'm very emotional, but I also respect data and science. And to me, this is a no-brainer. We need to pass and get the conversation going on the Missouri Youth Mental Health Preservation Act, because it truly will save lives. So the Missouri bill will say that folks that go to the state of Missouri for licensing, like social workers, therapists, things like that they are not able to practice this widely debunked so-called conversion therapy. There is not a legitimate medical group out there or a mental health organization out there in the entire country that says that this works. And not only does this kind of therapy not work, it causes great harm for people, both short-term and long-term. I have an entire file folder of letters that I've received from Missourians, but also from people all around the country sharing their experiences with me. And it's just heartbreaking, including hearing from people that are my age that were forced to go through, really bizarre conversions decades ago, and they're still struggling with the physical and emotional harm that was done. So although the legislative session has been cut short this year, just filing the bill and having that bill out there, I think, is a good thing. But I really, really need everybody's help on this. One of the things we can do between now and when we come back in January is continue to talk to anybody that will listen about some of these issues. I do think Representative Razer's absolutely right. I think MONA should be our #1 priority as an LGBTQ community, but the conversation about banning a mental health practice or counseling that is so awful on people is part of that same conversation. All this comes down to treating people with respect and dignity and accepting people for who they are. So between now and January, if you could help us out by talking to people about why we need to pass this ban on this so-called conversion therapy, it would be very helpful. I think it feeds nicely into the conversation about why we need to pass MONA as a state and just do the right thing for folks. So again, it's a huge honor to be asked to sponsor this bill. I'm going to do everything I can to keep raising this up. One of the cool things about even filing this bill last year and this year again is that there are media outlets and some very small media markets, if you will, that have reached out to us, and they want to talk about this issue. So I feel like, you know, we're getting into people's homes, and I just know from the bottom of my heart, I know that there are families that are hearing about this conversion therapy ban. They're seeing a little snippet on it on Joplin TV, and it's making some adult in a child's life rethink, like, you know, maybe I'm the one that needs counseling. Maybe there's something wrong with me if I can't accept my child for who he or they are. So we have to keep up the conversation. The whole point of filing a bill, I mean, sure, I'd like to see this bill get across the finish line, but there are other reasons to file a bill, which is we get to use our soapbox and amplify messages and talk to the public. And I need your help. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Tracy McCreery, for being another champion that we have in the Capitol that we know that we can depend on and go to with our stories and our experiences. So I'm going to pass it over to Senator Brian Williams. Senator Brian Williams is our champion when it comes to sponsoring Mona in the Senate. He is our Senate sponsor. This is his first year sponsoring Mona, but he has a really important message, especially and timely right now, what we're experiencing with COVID-19. So Senator Brian Williams, take it over.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. First, I want to thank Lori for coming on and just taking out the time to talk about your story and your journey through professional sports. So thank you so much for that. And then as well as Promo for everything that you do. You know, it's amazing the advocacy and how hard your team worked, even just to put this virtual town hall together. So Promo, its staff, as well as its supporters, thank you so much for everything you do, as well as those that are listening. For me, I filed the Missouri Nondiscrimination Act this year in the Missouri Senate, and it was a really unique opportunity for me, because as a straight Black male, and as the only Black man in the Missouri Senate, I felt it was important to, one, not only continue to advocate for what I consider a civil rights issue, but also to really inform and educate not only my colleagues in the Senate, but also the African American community on the social determinants of health, addressing LGBTQ members, as well as structural determinants. And I think that's something that we become a little bit off base with sometimes, because, you know, we don't really understand how much of a challenge it is to be comfortable in your identity when you already have racial and marginalized challenges that impact you already. So that just makes it pretty much a double whammy. So I wanted to be able to be a champion for this issue and remind everyone, including people of color, that it's okay to be comfortable with your identity. It's okay to come out and be who you are and be that person to the best of your ability. And also to be able to do it and go throughout not only this building, but throughout my district and talk about the importance of embracing our LGBTQ family. So it's been a cool journey for me. One thing I will tell you, it's not the best time right now for us, clearly, with social distancing, being back in the Capitol with hundreds of people, but I haven't given up this fight, as I stated earlier. And I'll be working extremely hard to get a committee hearing for this bill that I filed. And then also be working extremely hard to get it on the floor and talk about an important issue, especially since we have people in the building that are thinking it's mutually exclusive to talk about things that don't really impact people in this state during this pandemic. So I believe it's an opportunity to continue to do the work and continue to fight for the issues that we believe in collectively, and all of my colleagues on this panel, but also be able to continue to inform and educate. And I'm proud to be a part of this town hall and talk about that.
Thank you so much, Senator. All of you, thank you, all of our champions who make sure that we can continue to push equality forward within the Missouri legislature. It is so vitally important to have each and every single one of you working in the Capitol. and to be able to do this with us every year. So thank you so much. I'm actually going to pass it now over to Denise Lieberman. Tracy McCreery made a little bit of an intro, but Denise Lieberman is our promo general counsel, a member of our promo pack, but is here today to talk to us about something a little bit different than the pack, but to have a conversation with us about the different other facets of equality outside of the legislature just itself. We are running a little bit over on time, just to let you all know, so we'll really quickly, after Denise, we'll talk about what we can do. Each and every single one of our champions today talked about the importance of your voice and your story, and so we're going to talk about how to share that after we have Denise Lieberman speak. So I'll send it on over to you, Denise.
Thanks so much, Karis. Thanks. Hi, everybody. My name is Denise Lieberman. As mentioned, I serve on the Promo PAC board, and where we work to help elect lawmakers who are going to be responsive to the needs of Missouri's LGBT citizens. But I also have the privilege of serving as general counsel to Promo. And this is a really, it's a great honor. It's a very exciting position. And you might think, hey, I didn't realize that Promo was a legal organization. It's the Missouri's LGBT advocacy organization. It's Missouri's LGBT political organization. But the truth of the matter is that because the Promo represents the voices of Missouri's LGBT population, it's really important to be able to translate those voices into legal cases. And so even though there are really terrific lawyers who are bringing cases all across the state, we realized, I guess about maybe a decade, 15 years ago, who knows, that it would be really important for the courts to be able to hear directly from the populations that are most impacted by the cases they are taking. And so I've had the privilege of being able to file legal briefs in a number of cases on behalf of Promo that really help uplift the stories of Missouri's LGBT populations. And so if there's one theme that you're seeing amongst all these speakers here today, it's that your story really matters. It's impactful. It impacts lawmakers. It impacts judges. And you are the expert in your story. And that's why it's so critical that these stories be told, that they be told at the legislature, but that also that they be told in the courts. And so I guess where I want to kind of go with this is just give you a couple of trends. I know we're short on time. I think many people, as we've been talking about Mona today, might be surprised to learn that it's still legal in 25 states to discriminate based on sexual orientation and gender identity. While about 50% of our nation's population lives in a state that has discrimination protections, 25 states don't, including Missouri. And this may seem particularly at odds with the stream of court decisions, even just starting with marriage equality, where in Obergefell, the court writes that LGBT folks ask for equal dignity in the eyes of the law. The Constitution grants them that right. And yet, here in Missouri, you can be fired from your job, you can be denied access to housing, and you can be denied access to public accommodations based on your sexual orientation or your gender identity or your perceived sexual orientation or gender identity. And that's something that we have been trying to fight both in the courts and in the legislature. And obviously Mona is a critically important piece of legislation that would add Missouri to the list of 22 states that provide explicit protections for gender identity and sexual orientation. And this is true at the federal level as well. Federal discrimination laws also don't include explicit protections for sexual orientation and gender identity. And so what's happening now, both here in Missouri and at the federal level, is court cases asking the courts to recognize that discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity is part of existing discrimination laws that make it illegal to discriminate on the basis of sex, which is the federal law, or on the grounds of sex, which is Missouri's human rights statute. And so I want to highlight that there are a couple of cases that are in front of the United States Supreme Court right now that ask that very question. It's a series of 3 cases. 2 of them have to do with sexual orientation discrimination in employment, and the other has to do with gender identity discrimination in employment, where lower courts struggled to answer the question of whether or not discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity is the same as discrimination because of sex. one lower court saying it would require considerable calisthenics to remove sex from sexual orientation. Those cases were heard in front of the US Supreme Court back in October. We could get a ruling any day now, quite literally. And this is the first series of gay rights cases before the US Supreme Court since the retirement of Justice Kennedy, who had been the primary author of the whole stream of LGBT rights cases. And so, and there were a pair of cases as well right here in Missouri that were ruled on in the Missouri Supreme Court about a year ago, also dealing with sexual orientation and gender identity. And we at Promo had the opportunity to file legal briefs in those cases. But it doesn't solve the question, right? And even if we get the right decision at the Supreme Court, which it's sort of unclear from the oral arguments whether we will, we still need those explicit protections right here in Missouri. And I'm gonna end sort of with this, because I think the challenge here with this tension is what we're seeing is the backlash. And I actually think that this is a good sign. A lot of us think like, well, the law is like always on this kind of upward progression. And the truth of the matter is that it tends to be more jagged. And that's because with every major step up, you're going to see backlash, right? And that backlash actually means that we're being effective. It means we still have work to do, but it means that we have been effective. So, right, so for example, we saw a bill in Missouri this year, folks so offended by marriage equality that there was a piece of legislation that would literally remove the institution of marriage from the books in Missouri. And as absurd as that sounds, it actually passed out of committee. Now, fortunately, it didn't go further. And we're seeing that same sort of backlash with respect to issues of public accommodations. You all may remember the Masterpiece Cake, the Colorado cake baker that wouldn't bake cakes for gay weddings due to religious beliefs. Well, now there are a series of other cases involving flower shops that won't give flowers for gay weddings, wedding video shops that won't do videos for gay weddings, cake shops that won't do cakes for gay weddings, even a pizza parlor in Indiana that won't cater pizzas for gay weddings, and due to sort of religious beliefs. And that's really where these big battles are going to come from. Missouri even tried to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot a few years ago that would allow people to evade discrimination laws that make it illegal to discriminate in public accommodations if it was based on their religious beliefs. And so these are really important battles that we have yet ahead of us on the legal front, because discrimination laws in employment, housing, public accommodations, those are there to protect everybody. And if all the other movements and historic movements for civil rights have taught us anything, it's that it's very critical that we move to ensure that these protections are upheld and that we can't sort of skirt out of them, right? Could you imagine today even thinking that people could deny people the seat at the lunch counter because they have some conscience objection to it? That's exactly what these accommodations cases are about, and why we need to work to fight. So what I want to end with this. History shows that this backlash happens when we haven't made gains in the fight for equality. And so that means we need to stay the course. We need to stay vigilant, and we stay vigilant by helping tell stories, uplift the stories, both in the courts and in the legislatures. And we know, though, that we are headed down the road to helping ensure full legal protections under law for Missouri's LGBTQ citizens if we stay the course, if we keep fighting.
Thank you so much, Denise Lieberman, for joining us. I know for many of you, you knew all of our champion legislators who were joining us. You saw that Lori Lindsey was joining us, and we surprised you with the gift of Denise Lieberman being able to talk about law and really what this looks like, right? And why, even when we see Supreme Court cases, that it's still important that we pass MONA. It's still important that we have explicit protection. So we might go a little bit over on time, but I want you all to stay with us and continue to join us as we talk about what does this look like sharing our stories in light of COVID-19. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick so then you all can see a little bit about how to share your story. We were able to have a conversation about legislation, we were able to have a conversation about this legislation that's in front of us. We talked a little bit about how we had anti-LGBTQ bills that were in front of us. And really, whenever we progress, when we are able to achieve equality, when we're able to move that needle, it's through those stories, just like Lori said, just like our legislators said, and just like Denise said. And so we're going to ask you today to share your stories with us. Share your story as an ally to LGBTQ Missourians. Share your story as an LGBTQ Missourian. We know that we've already faced, as LGBTQ Missourians, barriers. We're not protected in housing and employment and vital services like healthcare. And we're continuing to see how those lack of protections are hurting us even more during this pandemic. And how COVID-19 and those devastating effects of COVID-19, those healthcare effects and those economic effects on all of us are being intensified by LGBTQ Missourians. And we understand that if we just silently experience these devastating effects, our leadership will not understand the vital importance of passing protections. They need to hear from us. Our community leaders need to hear from us. Our legislators need to hear from us what it's like to be an LGBTQ Missourian, especially during this time in a pandemic, and the devastating effects of not having protections. So we're going to ask you today to share your stories. I'm going to talk a little bit really quickly about how to craft a story. Some of you who are tuning in have been through a story development training with us. Some of you have shared your stories at an Equality Day in the past, and some of you have not shared your story yet. And I'm going to encourage you to do that today, even if it's new to you, because even if you're an ally, I assure you that you have a story. You have something that brought you here today, that made you tune in because you care. And that is what we want you to share. So some people ask about the stories. What about the facts? Don't we want to share all the facts and the statistics? And I know Representative Tracy McCreery said how much she loves facts and statistics, and I'm with you 100%. But that's something that our amazing lobbyist and manager of public policy, Samadi, does with our legislators all throughout session. He gives them the facts, he gives them the statistics, he gives them the packets. And what they need to hear from us are the stories. You, just like Representative Crystal Quade said, are the expert. You know your own story. You know the story of LGBTQ people you care about. You are the expert, and we cannot deny a person's emotional experience. So I'm here to say that your story is better than any fact. We have multiple stories that we can share, and I want you to think about this way. We have journey stories, the journey of knowing and loving and understanding someone who is LGBTQ, maybe someone you know who's experienced discrimination or lack of acceptance for their identity and who they are. We also, you can think about it another way, of our harm stories. A lot of our legislators heard a lot of harm stories this session during some testimony. And a harm story is when you depict a moment in your life that you yourself have experienced discrimination or lack of acceptance based on your identity or identities. There are many other stories that you can share, but this is a really great way to break it down. Do you have a harm story? Do you have a journey story? We all have something there to share. Then moving forward, when I think about structuring a story, it's really hard. As an LGBTQ person, it feels like my whole life is a story, or there are so many things that I could say. What do I say and what I don't say? And I want to say that the best way that I've found to structure a story is to think about a challenge. I think we're all experiencing a challenge right now. A challenge in trying to navigate this world that we're in that is new, and the choices that we have to make. We all have to make choices whenever we're faced with a challenge and what that outcome is. So think about that as an LGBTQ Missourian or as an ally to LGBTQ Missourians. Kind of frame it as a challenge that you are seeing, a choice that you have to make, and an outcome. And that is really how I think we best structure our stories to help folks understand. In order for folks to really connect, we don't always have the same stories. And sometimes we can't fathom the story that someone else is saying because we've never had an experience like that. So the best way to connect with other folks, obviously, is to make sure that it's a personal experience. If someone you love, you have permission of sharing their story of your own personal experience. But really what helps folks understand and changing those hearts and minds is being vulnerable in your story. Naming those emotions of joy and fear. Those are emotions that we've all felt. I have felt fear, you have felt fear, I have felt joy, you have felt joy. And those are the parts of the story that when folks are testifying, making phone calls to legislators, having conversations with community leaders, that's the part of the story that we can all connect with. We can all connect with those emotions and those senses. So be a little vulnerable. It's okay. People need to hear our vulnerability. They need to hear about the connection of shared universal values of honesty and loyalty and hard work. Whatever your values are, think about those, because those values brought you here. Those values brought you here today and are keeping you on past our time. And finally, just connect your choice and outcome. If you use that structure, connect it with what's going on. How are you doing? How are people you love doing right now? And what do you want people to know? What do you want our leadership and our community to know? So that is really what's going to help us. We're asking you to craft that today and take action. So I'm going to pass it on over to our communications manager, Shira Berkowitz, who introduced us and started us off today. And Shira's going to talk about how to take this story that you can take time crafting today and how to send that out so then we can have the best impact together after this equality rally.
Okay, so we have 3 actions for how we're asking you to share actions today. We have a virtual postcard. The prompt is, what is it like to be LGBTQ? An LGBTQ Missourian or an ally to an LGBTQ Missourian in a state without protections during the coronavirus pandemic. We have already sent you an email, and in that email is a link that will send you to our virtual postcard. You can also find that postcard at promoonline.org on our homepage, and you can also tweet your story. If you tweet your story, we would love for you to include these handles that will speak to that Missouri House and the Missouri Senate. You can also include Promo Missouri so that we can see that you've completed this story share, and we'll amplify it and lift up your voice. And you can also go to Facebook and share your story on your personal Facebook, tag at Promo. And we will also lift up your story from there. Thank you again to all of the legislators and to Denise Lieberman for joining us today. Also Lori Lindsey, but who's already popped off.